And to the nation's 69 schools of medicine is entrusted the responsibility of passing on unbroken the inheritance of medical knowledge, of indoctrinating each young student with the traditions and ethics of his chosen profession. Here he must spend 4 long years.
Really, physicians tend to practice the way they were taught as a young person in medical school. So a new idea has to find its way through essentially 3 stages. First being attacked as being outlandish, and then eventually being accepted, and then finally being taught. Each one of those stages could conceivably take almost a generation, a 20-year turnover of physicians. We don't have some fancy monitor that says, oh, they could use a unit of blood. What we use are surrogate measures, and the most common surrogate utilized is the hemoglobin level, and that's the level of the red stuff in your blood, or the hematocrit, which is the percentage of red blood cells that circulate in the bloodstream.
Back when I was in medical school, really anybody who had a hematocrit less than 35 was transfused. And we deemed success by if we got the hematocrit up to the normal range, 45. That's our only measure of success that we had. And if anybody had symptoms such as they were weak or tired, even if their hematocrit was in the mid-35 range, well, that's not normal. Well, a unit of blood will make them feel better. We were under, I believe, just treating people because that's the way that we were taught, and we never had any evidence-based medicine to suggest that we were doing any good. And more recently, obviously, we were possibly causing harm.
I think it's a good volume expander, and I think that's what we use it for more than anything. It's easy to measure a hemoglobin and see that it's low, give a unit of blood, and you know, 2 hours later you can check a hemoglobin and the hemoglobin is higher. So you feel like you've done something. Has it necessarily benefited the patient? I'm not convinced of that. It's perhaps benefited the people taking care of the patient, because, you know, hemoglobin at time X and then hemoglobin at time Y, and you've seen an appropriate change. The issue is whether that change means anything clinically.
Well, those surrogates are merely laboratory values, and they don't tell us the individualized need of a given patient for blood to be administered.
There are a lot of studies now that show that lower transfusion triggers are just as safe as higher ones, and sometimes even safer.
I have seen a lot of patients with hemoglobin that is very low, like maybe 5, 4, or 3, even as low as 2, and they survive. I have talked to a lot of doctors in the Philippines, and I said, what's your experience with these people with hemoglobins that are low? And they said, yes, they're walking. Hemoglobins of 6, hemoglobins of 5. Now, why are these people surviving? Why are these people doing things? They are carrying sacks of rice, they are carrying water, they are farming, hemoglobin of 6 and 7. So there must be a reason to that. A lot of things could really be understood in the light of human physiology.
There's significant variabilities in average hemoglobins amongst different nations on the globe. If you're living up in the Himalayas, your average hemoglobin is going to be high. If you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you're exposed to both malaria and other diseases, your average hemoglobin will be extremely low. Some children run around with hemoglobins below 5 grams in sub-Saharan Africa and are never transfused because there is no blood available. So I think there are significant geographical variabilities, all of which can add to the lesson of how individuals survive under those circumstances.
The history of blood banking and transfusion is really intimately related with injury. And if you go back in history, as far back as you go, the first transfusions were related to injury.
In fact, blood as a therapy just sort of happened as a consequence of military. The World War II was really the genesis of blood banking and transfusion practice in this country.
It was out of that Second World War realism of being able to save a life with fresh whole blood that blood transfusion got its good name.
I think it was perceived it was in a bottle, and that was red, life-giving blood that carried oxygen. I don't think anybody knew any of the nuances about whether, storage of blood reduced its oxygen carrying capacity. As far as people were concerned, if you lost the red stuff, you needed the red stuff back.
Today we'd like to pay tribute to the National Blood Donor Campaign with a special program by one of the hardest working entertainment groups in the Far East Command, the Corntones. Hunt, two. Hey, boy. That's right, we're the Corntones, a bunch of Army Signal Corps officers that kind of let our hair down after duty hours. How about you, Don? When was the last time you visited the blood bank? Oh, gee, Bill, I kind of know my way blindfolded around that place. I go in just about every 2 months. In fact, yeah, here it is. Here's my card, Bill. 7 pints of blood, Don. That's right. In other words, 1 more pint and you'll be qualified as a gallonier. Right. Well, that's something you can well be proud of. How did the rest of the Corntones stack up with you? Oh, Bill, why don't you ask them? How about it? Come in here.
Hi, Bill.
Dude, what outfit were you with in Korea?
I commanded L Company, 38th Infantry Regiment.
Don has told me before, Jude, that you were wounded in action in Korea. Did you require any blood?
Fortunately, Bill, I didn't. But many of my men required blood. And on their behalf, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for giving your blood. Believe me, you saved a lot of lives.
The belief or the public relations of give a unit of blood, save a life continued on and continued on with the goal of getting the American public to participate and feel altruistic about giving a unit of blood.
Patriotic citizens are giving their blood to save the lives of their soldiers and sailors. 500,000 pints have been donated, and the Red Cross Blood Bank is accepting voluntary contributions at the rate of $2 million a year.
But you got to remember where that was and the context of where that was. That was in battlefield trauma, massive trauma.
It was empirical evidence because you could give blood to a soldier wounded on the battlefield and the soldier survived, and the inference was that it was the transfusion that saved that person's life, therefore that's an indication for transfusion.
Those policies and concepts and thought processes were then implemented in some degree in the civilian community.
I think in the late 40s, early 50s, nobody really understood that there was necessarily problems with blood transfusions. And we didn't understand the infectious disease risks. We certainly didn't understand the lung injury risk. And I'm not sure people fully understood the immunologic risk back then. So I think giving blood was just part of practicing medicine.
Blood transfusion did work to save lives during World War II, when people were bleeding to death on the battlefield. What has happened with many procedures is they go from heroic results in one context to being overutilized.
There was very little science around when should it be used, where should it be used, how much should it be used, who will benefit from this. The 50s and 60s were really uncontrolled. I mean, it was whatever the physician wanted it to be. And physicians assumed a central role in making decisions for patients and did not incorporate patients into those decisions.
I want to make myself clear, Ken. It's within my responsibility to tell Punch.
Don't. I'm warning you, Mark, don't. He's my son.
He's my patient. I'd rather have your okay, but I'm going to do what's best for him in any case.
More than most professions, the medical profession is a culture. Doctors are kind of unique in changing their name when they become members of this culture. They go from being John Jones to being John Jones, MD. It gets attached to their practical identity.
It's very easy to fall into the trap of saying, you know, I know what I'm talking about, therefore you should listen to me. And that's really paternalism in its worst form. Ethically, I think that patients are still being subjected to more paternalism than they should be.
I, working in the United States, of course, see blood married to patriotism, love of country, love of family, love of community. And while clinicians, both nurses and physicians, want to feel that they're above all that, it's the evidence that dictates practice, not any of this other social or cultural stuff. That really isn't true.
I would say that in medicine today, the utilization of blood transfusion has grown into a religion. Today, there are a number of us who are questioning this vision of give a unit of blood, save a life.
I'm interested in the appropriate use of blood in physicians using as little as possible.
The challenge for us is to make blood make you better, not find a circumstance where giving blood back won't make you worse, which is the current state of the art. An amazing state of the art, I'll tell you, amazing. We give blood in the hopes you won't get worse. Imagine telling a patient, I'm going to give you this stuff, and I hope you won't get worse. And I'm giving it to you because if I don't give it to you, I think you're going to get worse. Now, can I make you better? I don't know about that. Will I make you worse? Maybe.
Ни один спасенный этой кровью боец будет думать с сердечным волнением об этих людях. Сыны и дочери героического советского народа ничего не пожалеют, чтобы вернуть к жизни раненых доблестных воинов с беззаветной решимостью, защищающих каждую пять родной советской земли.
Надо сказать, что, наверное, СССР в этом плане, наверное, было в свое время прогрессивно. То есть, хотя были годы разрухи, 1924 год, всего 7 лет прошло после революции, а уже специальным декретом советской власти были обязаны создаваться банки по заготовке и хранению крови.
Blood banks, as we know them, I would recognize them, really started in World War I. Obviously spurred by all the combat casualties that were coming out, the advent of modern high-velocity weapons, machine guns, and high explosives and artillery, et cetera, created horrific wounds.
Because of the demands of wartime, which were actually driven by the need to have plasma in a lyophilized form, in a freeze-dried form that could be carried out into the battlefield and then reconstituted just using fluids, that really drove the collection of blood.
The accumulation by the Navy of blood plasma, a recent and important discovery of medical science, provides each ship's sick bay with a permanent bank for use in transfusion. Furnished by volunteer civilian donors through the agency of the American Red Cross, the blood plasma may be stored indefinitely and given to any patient without risk, regardless of his blood type.
Вот, по литературе тоже знаю, что действительно был такой период в истории в СССР, когда рекомендовалось с целью увеличения количества крови заготавливать трупную кровь. Инициатором этого направления был известный очень в то время, это в 30-е годы прошлого столетия, профессор Юдин.
There was an opportunity post-World War II to capitalize on the lessons learned during the war about the ease with which blood could be collected, people's willingness to donate blood. And because all of that was true, there began to be an industry.
I'm the manager of a savings bank with branches all over the country. But we are by no means an ordinary savings bank. In fact, our vaults contain something much more valuable. They contain flasks of life-giving blood and plasma. During 1948, nearly 300,000 men and women will each have given half an hour of their time and 2/3 of a pint of blood to maintain this service. When the blood transfusion service makes an appeal in your district, please volunteer to become a donor. I'm sure some of you here are already regular donors. Thank you, blood donors.
The blood banks, as they became more popular and got implemented into civilian medicine, there was a greater pressure on the blood bank directors and the blood banks to deliver red blood cells to larger and larger civilian elective surgery. Trauma centers started coming in the United States, and the pressures from an inventory management point of view overcame the priorities of clinical outcome associated with these new products.
In the 1950s and 60s, blood transfusion morphed into and away from the utilization of fresh whole blood towards a world in which we started to have just separated red blood cells and other coagulation components.
And frankly, the economic pressures of taking a unit of blood, and if you give that to one patient versus taking that one unit of blood and separating it out into 6 or 7 components that you can give now to multiple patients. Economically, that's a much more beneficial model for a blood bank business, which is what these blood banks are.
I don't know that anybody ever said why. You know, why do you need to transfuse this